Hey everybody, welcome to session 179 of the Behavioral Observations podcast. I'm joined again by Dr. John Michael Guercio to discuss a topic that we touched on briefly in his first appearance on the show, and that's behavioral relaxation training. In the show, John takes us through a deep dive into BRT, drawing on the research of Drs. Roger Poppin, Duane Lundervold, and of course John himself. John, along with Drs. Poppen and Lundervold, is the co-author of the third edition of the text, Behavioral Relaxation Training. He's also the author of Assessment of Adult Care Competencies, Teaching Skills to Adults with Autism and Severe Behavioral Challenges, which we discussed at length in his earlier appearance on session 140. So in this particular episode, we talk about how BRT was developed, some current applications, some potential applications. We also spend a lot of time talking about how to get trained and train competently to implement BRT and how to protect client safety in the process. And in case we weren't clear during the discussion, this is something you really want to get good training and supervision in. It's not something you just want to read a blog post about or something like that and go off to the races, if you will. For Patreon subscribers, there's some bonus content. There's an additional 10 minutes or so where John tells a really fun story about meeting his childhood football hero and how this particular childhood football hero invited him to his house for wings and beer. It's kind of a really fun story, totally off topic, but just kind of interesting. And so I want to share that for folks in the Patreon group. If you are not in the Patreon group, there is if you go to patreon.com/behavioral observations, you can sign up, and there is a ad-free and even introductory comment-free podcast feed that you can get that has that type of bonus content as well. We also do some kind of on-brand bonus content too. It just so happens that John had this funny story, and I want to make sure it got cataloged somewhere in the behavioral observations universe. I also want to let you know that we tried to grab all the references that we made during the show and put them all in the show notes for this particular episode. You can find those at behavioralobservations.com. Before we get to the interview, we've got a couple of sponsors that I want to give shout-outs to. Behavior University, their mission is to provide university-quality professional development for the busy behavior analyst. Find more about their offerings as well as podcast-specific discounts over at behavioruniversity.com/observations. We're also brought to you by Tate Behavioral, a progressive ABA provider located in the Pioneer Valley of Massachusetts. If you're a progressive BCBA looking to work for a supportive and innovative team and live in the heart of charming New England, visit their jobs page by clicking tatebehavioral.com/careers. We're also brought to you by the Secret Agent Society Small Group Program. This is a comprehensive espionage-themed service that clinics and schools can offer to help kids ages 8 through 12 crack the code of emotions and friendships. This program has a sophisticated digital health platform so you can choose to intervene face-to-face with telehealth or a combination of formats. So if this is something you'd like to learn more about, let them know that I sent you to have your Secret Agent Society provider establishment fee waived, and that's a $500 value. I'll have the links to this in the show notes for today's episode. And last but certainly not least, we were brought to you by the Whoop Strap. We talked about the Oura Ring and the Whoop Strap and other type of, biometric devices during this particular podcast, so I thought I'd mention that I've been wearing the Whoop Strap for, well over a year now. And I really can't tell you how much I've enjoyed getting the quantitative information on all aspects of my health, including sleep analytics, heart rate variability, calorie burn, exercise intensity, and much, much more. I can go on and on about the device, but I just suggest if you're interested, if you've been on the fence about getting something like this, you check out the Whoop. It's a really unique device, very different than some of the others that are out there. I've liked it. Maybe it's something that would fit your needs as well. If you're interested in learning more, you can go to behavioralobservations.com/Whoop. And when you sign up there, you'll get your first month for free. So that's it for opening remarks. So without any further delay, let's get right to this fun conversation about behavioral relaxation training with John Guercio.
Welcome to the Behavioral Observations Podcast, stimulating talk for today's behavior analysts. Now here's your host, Matt Sikoria.
All right, Dr. John Michael Guercio, how's it going, man? Welcome back to the show.
Man, it's going great. I must be on here more than one time. You got my name pronunciation down perfect.
Well, those of us with last names that end in vowels, we have to kind of stick together. So
absolutely.
I my default is just to spell it to people. If I'm like at the pharmacy or, someplace where they need to take my name down or what have you, or if I'm on the phone with customer service, I just start spelling it. I don't even say it anymore. So it's kind of keeps. I
dropped off one of my guitars, one of my acoustics. I dropped it off to get like a setup done last week. And so she goes, okay, name. I said, okay, G is in George. I spelled the rest of it. And then she wrote out George Urcia. So even that sometimes kind of goes awry, but I can sympathize. The spelling and all that there's no way you just say it. You just go right into the spelling now.
That's right. The first world problems of Italian Americans, right? So I really enjoyed our conversation we had a few months back, and we've kept in touch in the between now and then. And I think we might have talked about behavioral relaxation training a little bit on the last show that you're on, but I know you had since co-authored a book on the topic, in addition to your other book about providing supports to individual adults with autism and related disabilities, and are an authority figure on this. BRT, or behavioral relaxation training, is something I came across randomly at an ABAI workshop. I got to ABAI early one year, and I was looking around at the available workshops, and I ended up hopping into one that was conducted. It was a half-day workshop on BRT. And
excellent.
Yeah. This has got to be in like 2008, I think.
Mm-hmm.
When it was at the Chicago, the Hilton. Anyway, I just thought it was fascinating. I thought it was really interesting. And I just kind of like filed that away in the back of my head, and I hadn't really, I tried it here and there, and I don't know if I had much success with it or not. And I just kind of forgot about it. And then I came up again when I, kind of saw some of your writings on it, and thought it would be fun to go into a little bit more depth in this, and maybe we can talk about what's new with it. But I do remember one of the things I did do, I ended up scoring like an original copy of the Roger Poppin book with the kind of maroonish pink cover.
Yeah, the pinkish color. Yeah, exactly.
So I do have that as a resource. But
yeah, I want to say that's either Sage Press or something like that. That was one of the the first one. So that one, that version I think goes for quite a bit now on eBay, and it's tough to find the second one. The second one had more of a blue cover on it, mm-hmm. and was kind of an updated version on some of the postures and those kind of things. So yes, we're in our third edition now, which is crazy.
Yeah. So, it was funny too, because I lent it to a colleague, and she actually misplaced it for a period of time. I'm like, you have no idea how hard that book is to find. Fortunately, she found it, but
man, yeah,
it all turned out well. And so I still have it. But anyway, so before we get too far down the road here, there's very likely a large percentage of the audience is like, what the hell are you guys talking about? So can you just describe, like, from an overarching standpoint, what behavioral relaxation training is in a nutshell?
Yeah, absolutely. And I may have talked about this last time on the show, Matt, but my primary advisor in grad school was Dr. Roger Poppin. So he is the founder and creator of behavioral relaxation training. So this is probably about in mid 80s, I want to say 85 or 86. I had a graduate student of his that they worked on trying to find EMG measures or electromyography, which is essentially looking at muscle tension levels as the body was placed into different postures. What's the most relaxed posture? And so as I was going through grad school, at that particular time, you could have a specialty in behavioral medicine, which is what I did. So I actually went into that, and we worked through the clinical center, and we had folks that would come in for counseling. And part of the counseling that we did, we saw a lot of folks with not only a lot of anxiety and depression, but we also saw a lot of chronic pain, which BRT is very, very useful for. So behavioral relaxation training, and I'll get into a little bit more detail later, but it is an approach to relaxation that covers 4 different modalities. So prior to its, genesis in 85 or 86, you had the unitary theories. So you had like Jacobson's progressive muscle relaxation that just focused on muscle relaxation. So the definition was your muscles are relaxed, you're relaxed. So from that point, there was then dualistic theories where you actually looked at trying to maybe go through and create a relaxing scene so that you could actually covertly be relaxed as well as muscle tension wise. And so this particular approach, Poppin's approach, is 4 modalities. So you actually have motoric and visceral. And as you go through each of these different areas, you look at a different way of relaxing. So motoric is muscle relaxation. There's observational. You go through and you're observing covertly the 10 postures we're going to talk about a little bit later. Then there's the visceral relaxation. As you're going through visceral relaxation, that you attend to your breathing and you try to attend to your heart rate and trying to get those, under a little bit better control. And so it's more encompassing, I think, as you go through and you look at some of the earlier theories that were out there. And I think just by virtue of including all those different areas, at one point, I think in the initial book, and we included it in this one as well, is that we actually looked at behavioral relaxation training as the aspirin of behavioral medicine. I think is how it was described, because it's something that for almost any disorder, if it's an anger issue or if it's anxiety, whatever it might be, that you could actually utilize this. And then the 4th modality is verbal. So as you're going through, the mindfulness is all the craze nowadays, and especially attached to ACT and a lot of other things. Mindfulness training is really big. And essentially, that's just verbal behavior. That's covert verbal behavior where you're actually repeating phrases that are paired with relaxed behavior. My forehead is relaxed now. My body is relaxed. So essentially, it is just trying to incorporate all those areas of relaxation into one based on physiology. All the postures we're going to talk about today were put in place based on an EMG analysis that produced the lowest levels of muscle tension. So a lot of it is scientifically based, and that's kind of how we get to the overarching BRT.
Okay, real quick, I want to just pause right there. Can you just hit those 4 modalities again real quick, just to kind of summarize those? Sure.
You don't have to have EMG equipment, to measure electromyography, but the first one is motoric. Mm-hmm. So as you're looking at motoric behavior, motoric aspects of relaxation are essentially EMG measures. So those are things where if you look at an electromyography that you could get. The other one is visceral behavior. So as you're looking at behaviors like there are a lot of visceral components to migraine. So a lot of times through relaxation, you can go through and actually facilitate increased blood flow, but also visceral behavior is attending to things like breathing and heart rate that, prior to behavioral medicine applications, the general thought was those were not susceptible to environmental or other interventions. So we found otherwise. Verbal behavior. So those are self-reported relaxation. Typically, we get that after the measure. Hey, how are you feeling today? And, we have a Likert scale we're going to talk about a little bit later that the clients use. And then there's observational behavior. So we have the clients, even though their eyes are closed, they're going through and, okay, I want you to focus on your shoulders, your arms, your body, your mouth. And so there's that observational component. So motoric, visceral, verbal, and observational.
Okay, cool. Thank you for going through that again. I wanted to make sure that we got it all. And for folks listening along, if they might have missed 1 or 2 of those, it was a quick recap. So
Sure.
So what do we have evidence that EMG is correlated with relaxation? And what, maybe that begs the question, what is relaxation?
Right,
scientifically, and are we using EMG as a proxy measure for it? So can you talk a little bit about just some of the operational characteristics of what's going on here?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think, like other components that you would use this for, it crosses a multitude of response classes. So as you're looking at relaxation, that's what I think Roger initially wanted to improve upon. It's just in these unitary theories that the thought was you go through and you engage in relaxation and your muscles are relaxed, that you're relaxed. Well, anybody that's got a fear of flying will tell you that's not the case. You can be on the runway, tarmac, you're ready to take off, and your muscles are relaxed, but your heart's racing and you're breathing and you're sweating and you have all these other responses that go along with it. So to go along, it is a multimodal approach that you have to look at in order to look at what is this response. Now, in terms of being able to have these measures, prior to biofeedback in the 50s and 60s, there never really was a way to, so to speak, look inside the organism. So really all you could do is have a self-report that could be influenced by what the person you're reporting to is looking for. So if you're reporting to a therapist or to a doctor, and you might say, yeah, I'm perfectly relaxed. But I think with relaxation, the one thing that we want to be able to look at is that the self-report measure, but there are a number of physiological measures that we have now. We work with a company called Biocomp in Detroit. And they have a number of things that you just essentially, it's like a little credit card size box. It's almost like a separate USB you plug into your computer, and you can have all these digital scenes on your desktop. So you can have EMG, so the person can relax. And I have nonverbal and minimally verbal individuals that I can use. And essentially, as they relax, there's a big smiley face on the screen. And if they're tense, there's a frown, and as they relax more, it becomes more of a smiley face, so they can relate that. Now, it's not just EMG. We also can use skin temperature. So for folks that have migraine issues, migraine headaches, a huge indicator of that, or Raynaud's syndrome for that point, where individuals, their extremities are extremely cold. You may have met folks that middle of the summer, you shake their hand, they're ice cold. And that's an issue with the extremities. And so I think as you look at that, it could be peripheral neuropathy or other things. But if you use a thermistor that essentially you put on the index finger of either hand, and you can actually go through with behavioral relaxation training and go through and train individuals where they can get to the point where they raise their core temperature, or at least as it's measured at the index finger. There also is another measure, which is galvanic skin response. This is one that most folks are aware of as the old lie detector. And essentially what happens, the more anxious that you get, the more activity that you actually have in your sweat glands at the extremities. So you have a sensor on the finger that, as you're going through, and essentially that's where the GSR stuff was debunked, because individuals, if you're a master of being able to control these things and you've been training this for a while, you can have an anxious result, or if somebody is asking you a question to say, hey, does this BRT stuff work? I'm worried, and you say, well, no, it doesn't. And you know that it does, even if you're having an anxiety response or you're making a statement that is not the truth. Then you can control your physiology to the point as you engage in this relaxed response. So there's temperature, EMG, GSR is a good one as well. And another one that, if we have time, we can get into is neurofeedback is really, really all the rage now. And it's, trying to enhance beta alpha waves, either beta or alpha wave enhancement or suppression, which those are associated with relaxed behavior. And so I can remember in Mark Dixon's lab going through my PhD, we had some of these measures where we had folks that wore a cap that had probably 60 electrodes on it. And he had a little putting green in his office. And we would sit and we would, you'd have subjects come in and putt the golf ball, no problem. No anxiety is measured through the neurofeedback. But then you said, okay, this next putt's for $10. This next putt's for $5. And then we would bring in observers and have other people watching them. And guess what? then all the responses that you would correlate with anxiety are there and they show up. And that's how we trained relaxation, is doing that in the face of, that particular either set of observers. You put a little money on the line. I don't know if you watch a lot of golf, but Jason Day is he's a top 10 golfer year in and year out. And before every shot, he engages in imagery. You can see him. He goes through and he says he imagines the putt going in the hole. And that's his routine before every putt. So there's a lot of this, and a lot of those sports psychologists are basically using biofeedback to be able to do these things.
Hey everyone, I want to take a short break here and let you know that this segment of the podcast is brought to you by Tate Behavioral. Do you want to work for a progressive ABA agency with highly competitive benefits and a strong emphasis on professional development and growth? Do you want to work in a setting where you can be trained to implement peak, ACT, practical functional assessment, and skills-based treatment while collaborating with speech-language paths and other clinical practitioners? Located in the beautiful Pioneer Valley, Tate Behavioral is a growing behavioral and speech-language firm looking for 2 mid-career BCBAs who want to step up their careers. Tate is nestled within a region of strong communities, good school systems, all in an area with loads of New England charm year-round. Tate works across all settings, including home, community, and school consultation, and they have a newly opened day school for special education students in Longmeadow, Mass. Tate Behavioral has also established a new clinical resident position for graduate students looking to learn and grow in a collaborative setting. So if you're interested in learning more about their BCBA positions, please take a look at their website, tatebehavioral.com/careers, to connect with the senior leadership team. All right, let's get back to this conversation. Yeah, I could totally see the application in the realm of sports and other types of performance-based endeavors. I think anyone's ever played golf probably knows that there's a strong quote-unquote mental component to it, right? Especially if you make a bad shot right after making a good one, or vice versa. It is it's just a giant slot machine at times, I suppose, but with regard to the PGA, I know I don't follow it too closely, but I got a friend of mine who does, and he was telling me that he knows I have one of these Whoop straps that I've talked about before on the podcast. It's kind of like you take similar measures as does like an Apple Watch or an Oura Ring or something like that. But apparently, a lot of the Whoop strap is getting pretty big on the PGA Tour, and
they show readings on the strap on the screen.
They do.
There were
Okay.
a couple events last year where actually show Rory McIlroy was wearing one. And actually they had him, as he was about to go and to make a putt to essentially go and go up one, stroke on a guy. And you could just see his heart rate going up as he's going. He's stalking the putt, and then right before he makes it. And, those were very valuable. I think we talked last time. I've got an Oura ring, and it kind of does the same thing. That kind of monitors physiology, and you can look and say, okay, maybe I need to take a step back. I've had some buddies that I've played golf with in the past that, due to high blood pressure and other things, their doctor has put them on metoprolol or an ACE inhibitor or beta blocker to handle those issues. And as a result, their putting got better. Because what that does is it actually lowers your heart rate. A lot of like metoprolol, in other words, that's the it's the effect, but also it's the side effect. So if somebody has had cardiac issues, and lowered heart rate is an indicator of relaxation.
Fascinating. Yeah. I mean, I have a Whoop strap, and he knows about it because I'm always playing around with it when we go bike riding together. And so when he was watching golf one day, he was like, "Oh yeah, they're using the same thing." And yeah, so that's cool. They put that up on the screen. That's
really... You can actually go through and see what the heart rate's like, and it blows me away. I mean, you think just standing, most of us, to go from a sit to a stand, you get to triple digits. You can get to 100 beats a minute. But he was looking 140, 150, as he was getting ready to make a putt. And, I think McIlroy's in his early 30s, great shape, but still that physiological response, which I'll talk about in a little bit, you get all that cortisol dumped into your blood, then that's one of the first responses, that increased heart rate.
Yeah, I think regardless of one's conditioning level, I would imagine, 140 or 150 is noticeable for sure.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, it's just the heart rate alone is a really interesting metric to look at, and I use it, like I was saying, riding bikes and whatnot. And I actually have we're entering our 8 months of winter here in New Hampshire right now. And,
8 months, wow.
I only partially joke.
Off there.
Yeah. But so I have a bike on a trainer in my basement, and I've got this computer program that spits out the data from the Whoop and other, telemetry from sensors from the bike. It spits it out and throws it to the computer, so you can see that stuff in real time.
Oh, wow.
It's really neat to see the feedback on that sort of thing. So it's from a data geek's perspective, it's Disneyland for sure. So
and it helps you keep your heart rate in the zone, so that you're not dipping below, because that's typically the human response is as you're going through and you're exercising to ease up a little bit. And, okay, hey, I'm dropping out of the zone. And I think that on the Apple Watch, I've noticed that as well, because I'll go through and they'll do a workout. I'll go back and I'll look at calories burned. And, I may have a longer session and do more stretching, which is less aerobic, and I burn less calories. So it's not so much that the watch is, okay, longer session means more calories. As that's measured, I think there's that relationship between heart rate and those issues, and essentially BRT and all this is just the opposite of all that. It's looking at you. How do you go through the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system?
So fun gadgets aside, I want to go back to maybe the development of BRT. So if I understand you correctly, so it's not that they just decided on these postures and ran with it. They actually experimented with different postures and kind of arrived at these postures in such a way that specific combination of them produced the calmest state in the participants. Is that a fair description of how this was developed?
Exactly. And in the way that it was looked at initially is this whole idea, as we went through grad school, and I include it now as I teach behavioral medicine courses, is that one of the things that you look at is Hans Selye. He's the father of the stress concept. So whenever I do trainings around this, I spend a fair amount of time talking about, the way he talks about stress. And a lot of people talk about it, and, it is something in the environment, almost like it's a stimulus, stress, or sometimes people use it as a descriptor, I'm stressed, or you could use it as if you look at an object, the amount of stress, tension that a board can take or a rubber band. And so Selye would always say that it was stress was a non-specific response. So it included a number of different things for the individual. So you actually had this first thing that was what he called an alarm. So as you let's say you are having that near miss on the freeway, okay, you're checking your email and you look up and there's a car bumper and you have to switch. And this morning there was a bunch of black ice on the road. It's dark as I'm driving to work. And we had like a 4-car mashup on the bridge coming into work. So you get that, heart pounding, and as those things go. So that's kind of the alarm. Then your body pushes back to try and resist that. And, then you have this exhaustion. And I always, when I'm training staff about burnout, and especially with working with intensive behavioral clients, I always explain that you could be sitting at a desk all day long and you go through this and there's a number of separate stress responses. You're going to feel like you ran a marathon at the end of the day. So I think Roger and his students, back in the mid 80s, I actually got to SIU probably 2 or 3 years after they had started this research. So we were then starting to utilize the BRT with clients as they came in. But there was this idea of looking at, well, let's combine all these. Most folks, they have these things called autogenic phrases they engage in, where you sit down and say, okay, just relax. And what I want you to do is to go through and imagine that you're sitting on a beach in the Caribbean somewhere and you're relaxing and focus on your breathing. And so I think Roger wanted to bring all of those together to look at. There's these different physiological measures, because as you mentioned earlier, is relaxation, is that just decreased muscle tension? And he looked at it as a number of others. We know when we're anxious, that we have all these racing thoughts. So that's where the covert verbal comes in. We know that there's the racing heart, the sweat gland activation, all the other things that go along with that. In addition to the muscle rigidity, that's where the visceral came in. And then being able to observe these different responses. And, it's as I go through this and as I look at it, I think one of the things, we talked a little bit about this in the past, but I just finished up and we just published the third of a series of 3 papers on the history of behavior analysis. And, I don't know, I didn't talk to Roger a lot about this, but I include BRT in the third wave because I think as we're looking at these types of things, we're looking at covert verbals. I think that as we're looking at these things where this, I think, predates a lot of the mindfulness stuff. I know that Steve Hayes in the early 90s started talking about RFT, and then ACT developed a little bit after that. But I think as you're looking at covert verbals and how those impact anxiety, I think that's one of the things that Roger really was on top of early on, to say, okay, this is what this is going to address, the way people are defining anxiety. And we want to make it overarching and having a number of different definitions.
Hey everyone, just another quick break here. This segment of the podcast is sponsored by the Secret Agent Society Small Group Program. When the only thing certain in an ongoing global pandemic is uncertainty, how do schools, clinics, and service providers plan for the unpredictable? The Secret Agent Society Small Group Program has the answer to this challenge. With a sophisticated digital health platform now at the heart of the program, it supports any combination of face-to-face and telehealth formats for working with children and families. The digital edition of the Secret Agency Society is a one-stop shop for SAS facilitators to manage groups, schedule, tailor, and run sessions using built-in pre-populated content, engaging children using gamified learning, all from the SAS Facilitator dashboard. SAS offers complete flexibility at your fingertips without threatening program fidelity or outcomes. By becoming an SAS provider, your service can expand to provide efficient and effective group services for children and families across wider geographic areas without the risk of disrupting service continuity due to COVID-19 isolation requirements. If you'd like to be trained to be a Secret Agent Society facilitator, speak to your manager or supervisor and go to sst-institute.net to learn more. And don't forget to mention this podcast, too, for the huge discount to have your establishment fee waived, which is about a $500 savings. So to learn more, go to sst-institute.net, and don't forget to tell them that you heard about it on Behavioral Observations. Great. I want to come back to anxiety in a little bit more detail and talk about how we frame that in terms of scope of practice for traditionally trained BCBAs. But I think before we get too farther down the road, let's run through the postures of the BRT real quick. So we're talking about this set of postures. So for those people who didn't catch your first show or are just unfamiliar with coming at this from a fresh set of ears, what have you, can you run through what we mean by the postures?
Yes. So the BRT can be done, behavior relaxation training can be done both in a seated or what's called an upright way. So it's seated in a chair, like I am in now. So traditionally we train it in a recliner. So what you would do is to have the person, sit in the recliner, and then I'll use, visuals to kind of help the person. But typically it is having the person kind of get used to just sitting in the recliner. Sometimes at baseline, we'll say, okay, sit as you feel comfortable. And most people will cross their legs, and that is not relaxed. And that is one of the first things that we look at. So we have the person to sit back in the chair. First thing we'll have them do is close their eyes. Okay, so we try to describe as much as possible and it's tough, but most people will flutter their eyes with the eyes closed and continue to engage in that behavior. So first first posture is relaxed eyes. The next one is relaxed head. So what I'll have the clients do is imagine that, if they had a string that was going from their chin all the way down to their feet, which should be at about a 45-degree angle, it would be a straight line. Okay, so you got relaxed eyes, relaxed head, relaxed breathing. And so I always focus on diaphragmatic breathing. So as the person breathes in, there's more of a belly rise and fall. And then exhale, the belly falls. So I'll actually have clients to get that, especially those with intellectual disabilities, and even without, because most people are chest breathers, and that can get you lightheaded, and it's not leading to relaxing breathing. And so you have to kind of get more of the diaphragmatic breathing in. So we'll go through and stomach rises and falls. The next posture is relaxed tongue. So I have people to imagine that instead of, most people try to relax, but they're as tight as a board, and they'll try to press their tongue against their bottom teeth. And we'll just say, just imagine that the tongue is like a puddle in your mouth, and you're not moving it side to side or up or down. So that's relaxed tongue. Relaxed mouth would be, most people purse their lips and they're trying to relax, which is not relaxed at all either. And a lot of this, like as I go through it, I know your listeners are probably going to be going through and saying, well, this is kind of counterintuitive. But as you go through this, I think I mentioned on the initial show, it's about the equivalence of an hour and a half or an hour nap as you go through it as far as restorative function. So relaxed mouth, lips are slightly parted. And as we're going through the process, the next level is relaxed shoulders. And I always have clients imagine a coat hanger, that most people, especially if they have certain shoulder pain or stress, they'll go through and have the shoulder, one or both will raise up. So I'll just have them, decrease the shoulders, okay, like a coat hanger. Okay. And then relaxed body. The relaxed body is in midline. A lot of people, when they're in a recliner, they'll want to go for one side or the other. So I'll just have them as you have your head in midline, then your body's going to be straight in midline. Okay. And then you have your hands, depending on if you have a, recliner, most of them they all have arms on them. So you just have the person have their arm that's on the recliner. And what I have a person do is, as they're going through and relaxing, I'll say, if you have your relaxed hand, we don't want it flat on the chair. We want it to be like a claw, so that if you're going through with this claw, I can fit a pin underneath it, is the way that I describe, as opposed to having it flat. And that's the best way through electromyography that we found, that if the hands are flat, you've got some muscle tension. And if they're too tight like this, there's obvious muscle tension. So that would be relaxed hands. And then as we're going down further, you have relaxed feet. And as the person goes through, most people, like I said, they will cross their feet. And for most individuals, if they have their feet at a 45-degree angle, then, there should be relaxed at that point. So we go through and we do a minute of observation. And, I can get into kind of how the measurement of that goes. But there's a sheet that's used called the BRS. It's the Behavioral Relaxation Score Sheet. Their Behavioral Relaxation Scale that we utilize to be able to do a plus for relaxed posture, a minus for unrelaxed. And then as the person is going through the different postures, I might say shoulders. And that's a cue for the person. Oh, okay, I need to drop this shoulder as they get through the 10 postures. And so from baseline through intervention, the process is to kind of go through and have the person look at, most individuals are maybe 30% on the BRS during baseline. And then we get them up to about 80 or 90% and that's proficiency. And then if they're, 80 to 90% or, 8 or 9 of the postures that they have correctly, and they're nailing that each time, then they're getting the full physiological benefit from BRT at that time.
Got it. What are some of the, when you mentioned full physiological benefits? So let's talk about that a little bit more detail. So you said going through this process can produce a similar result as taking a nap. What are the other physiological benefits to doing this? What outcomes do people see when they engage in this practice more generally?
Well, we have gotten to the point where we have individual and group sessions. And so we have a lot of our individuals that come to us with borderline personality disorder diagnoses and coexisting psychiatric diagnoses other than that. And so the states approached us and they said, what you need to, a lot of the places that we get our clients from, there are a few of the state-run facilities that are their expertise is in DBT, so dialectical behavior therapy. So what we've done is we've become proficient in that, and then infused it with ABA. So we do ABA informed DBT. So we have groups, as you would in DBT. We talk about emotional behavior, but in the terms of ACT, what's emotional behavior, and looking at experiential avoidance and all of those types of things. But then as we're going through the process, we start out each group with 10 minutes of relaxation. So we'll have them go through and do mindfulness. Because, it's for our clients, okay, let's sit down, it's time for behavioral relaxation training. They just know, let's do our mindfulness. So we have everybody to where, they're focused, they engage in these behaviors, and then they give us a self-rating between 0 and 7, with 0 being as relaxed as they've ever been, and 7 is tense and as upset as they've ever been, or anywhere in between. And what we find is that they are more attentive, okay, as they're doing this, and a lot of the things, Charlie Catania always says that you have to look at, is it a noun or a verb? And most people will say, well, attention. He needs more attention, as opposed to let's just use the term attending. Okay, we behavior analysts like to use verbs instead of nouns. So attending.
Oh, yeah. I like
so
that.
they're attending behavior. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's just a comment. That's an interesting way to look at some of these more fuzzier concepts. What is the actual act that's happening? So yeah, right. But we do see increases in attending behavior. We also see the obvious muscle tension and the other areas. But I don't have exact data on it, and I wish I did. We used to have a lot more brawls in our groups than we do now when we've incorporated BRT. We don't have as much of that back and forth and individuals getting upset with each other. So I think that, if you look at those types of things in terms of, a person's ability to be able to give and take feedback that may be a little bit challenging in a group setting, I've seen huge improvements over that as well. So there just are a number of things that we don't get started without it. And, we do 3 of these a day. Usually Thursdays are our group days. And, when you've got 15 people with intellectual disabilities coming in and they're like, hey, John, I want this. Did you give me my coupons? Did you go out shopping for this? Everybody wants to speak at once. It's great for the therapist, too. I sit down and get on the floor. I do my BRT. And then it's much easier to run the group, and they're a lot more receptive audiences as well when we do the BRT at first. And we have some of the data in the book, and I've got 2 years worth of data now where we're looking at the self-reports pre and post that 10-minute relaxation period. And we know about the pitfalls of self-report. So one of the things I'm looking at doing now is that it's probably going to have to be post-COVID, but I'm trying to talk to, our powers that be, our home offices in Fort Wayne, Indiana, but trying to get us some biofeedback equipment that we can utilize as more portable, that we can hook a lot of the clients up and actually look at physiology before and after the practice of BRT. And I can remember 4 or 5 years ago at Autism ABA, Dr. Nurbay Singh, who is mindfulness is his thing, especially the soles of the feet mindfulness. Yep. And he pointed out a paper of ours that we had done a few years before that I had done with Alyssa Wilson at St. Louis University. And he said, and the authors made the mistake of calling this relaxation. And he said, mindfulness is not relaxation. And, he's got a lot more published articles on this than I do. But in terms of what we see, it is relaxation. Every single person gets into a relaxed state. Now, mindfulness is not relaxation because the goal in mindfulness is non-judgmental attending to the environment, internal and external. BRT, the goal is relaxation. You're focusing, you're looking at different areas, and as you're going through that observational phase, one of the modalities, you are looking at, okay, if my left arm's a little tight, I need to loosen this up a little bit. So essentially, that's what we see across the board. A lot of folks report they feel kind of like jelly when they get done. But yeah, we see a lot more receptive clients to our group when we go through this prior than if we don't do it at all. You probably already know that Behavior University creates engaging ABA content for new and experienced professionals. Whether it's RBT training or webinars for BACB CEUs, Behavior University has you covered. Behavior University is launching an interactive BACB supervisor training, an innovative approach to supervision training with interactive video to practice decision-making and tools to create a personalized portfolio to take with you when you're done. The course is designed to guide new supervisors through applying the important skills required for effective supervision to their own unique experiences. Behavior University also offers 2 tiers of RBT training. Choose the essentials for the 40-hour course or the premium to add a full kit of study materials and a full-length practice exam. In addition to these features, supervisors can now purchase access to these RBT courses so they can monitor any RBT training for course progress and quiz performance. Supervisors will also receive tools and content to support training of new staff. Users rave about Behavior University RBT training, calling it the clearest instruction, the course that made it stick, amongst other comments. BCBA say that their staff clearly get it after taking their course. So to check out what they've built and to get podcast-specific discounts, head on over to behavioruniversity.com/observations. So are you saying that a client might be more receptive to other forms of therapy when kind of, I guess, preloading or pre-gaming with BRT?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We've got an article under review now with Behavior Analysis Research and Practice, where we had a gentleman that when he came to us, he had been in an institutional placement. And in institutions, they bring everything to you, your doctors, your food, your injections, your medications, these types of things. And so he came to us with a repertoire, a very slim repertoire of riding in a vehicle. Most of it had been riding with mom, when he was growing up, prior to being put in the institutional setting. And so we did this all the time. Prior to going on van rides, we would engage in relaxed behavior, prompting him through that. And he was able to go through and, he couldn't tell you, but he could immediately, if you said, hey, Scott, man, I'm noticing that you're doing that thing with your eyes again. When you get, usually when you do that, you're pretty upset or you break something shortly thereafter. And then he'll immediately hands to the legs and, he does a lot of herky-jerky breathing, but it's an approximation. So absolutely, I think that's a great term, front loading, that you're going to be able to have folks a little bit more attentive, especially if the person you're working with in behavior therapy is the underlying stuff related to this is anxiety. And a lot of anxiety and depression has an anger component to it. Anger is part of depression. And so as you go through this and somebody is having these issues, it's a fantastic adjunct to that.
You mentioned, so this is a specific application to an individual with an intellectual disability. And you said it was an approximation with his breathing. I'm curious, what tweaks to the protocol do you typically offer individuals who may not necessarily be able to perform the 10 postures? What have you seen that works, I guess?
Well, I think that a lot of our individuals have some physical issues that prohibit their ability to engage in the body to where everything is straight, in line. So there are certain folks where we would go through and do this in a practice in a wheelchair. And this question comes up all the time whenever I do webinars and train based on this. How do you do this with somebody that may be severely and profoundly impacted by their disability? And I think 2 things are of merit. I think one is environmental change, which is what we do, right? So we look at having the room that they're in, having lowered lighting and modeling the procedures first. So going through and showing the person what you're doing. And then we also have in their room for times where we're not there, just a model of all 10 of the relaxed postures so they can actually look and see what those look like, and then providing feedback. The breathing part, sometimes I'll tweak and just say, just make your breathing slower. So as opposed to the muscle, if they don't have as much control, especially if individual has a diagnosis of CP, they may not be able to do the diaphragmatic breathing as well. So we might just tweak that. And then what I'll focus on is I'll do a baseline count, because the breathing, we go through during baseline, and in 1 minute period of time, what you're looking for is you're going to look at the amount of respiration a person engages in for 30 seconds to a minute. So usually as you're looking at that, most folks are in the 12 to 14 neighborhood to look at your respiration rate. And so I'll just say, if it's really high in the beginning, I'll have them tweak that a little bit and lower it. And another one as well is that some people get really freaked out with the eyes closed thing. They just do. And it's a thing, it's a phenomenon called relaxation-induced anxiety of all things. And so I will give the option that if a person is not comfortable, and I can tell it, and that's usually pretty obvious, it's right up there, it's pretty clear, that say, okay, hey, if you want to keep your eyes open during this, it's okay.
Yeah,
especially for if it's a male and a female that are in the room.
Yeah, and I've heard that's sometimes the case with people who have been victims of trauma as well. That even just doing mindfulness activities on its own sometimes it can have some unintended outcomes for sure. So I'd love to get, so I appreciate getting into the nitty gritty here, and I want to maybe just zoom back out for a minute and look at ABA practice as a whole. Obviously, you've got a source of bias that I don't think anyone's going to argue with, and it's probably appropriate given your background in this. But what role could BRT play in the toolkit of the everyday behavior analyst? In other words, is this something you'd like to see in more behavior intervention plans? And if so, we should probably talk about steps to accomplish that. But I'd love to hear your thoughts more generally in terms of the broader applicability of this practice, and if so, what people need to be able to do it competently, safely, ethically, et cetera.
And those are all excellent considerations, because I'm not meaning to be negative about it, but I've seen so many plans, count to 10. Okay, well, that's great. We can count to 10. So now we know how to do that. Go to another area, get away from the person to relax, remove yourself from the situation. Well, that's fine. Okay, we're removing ourselves from the situation, but we also have to have a skill that we can produce, because if we're on an airplane next to somebody we don't like, or we're freaked out about the airplane, we can't leave the area. You can count to 10, but what about all the other things, the observational? So I would love to see this in more behavior intervention plans. I did a presentation at TexAB a few years ago, and Gordon Borland, he actually wrote the foreword to our book. And one of the things that he said is, gosh, I used to use this a lot, back in the 80s. And looking at behavior relaxation training, but you hardly ever see it in plans now. And again, I think with how prevalent mindfulness and those types of things are that are out there, mindfulness is a tough one, because people that are typically developing, for them to sit and somebody tells you, I want you to sit and non-judgmentally observe what's going on. That's tough. That is really tough, as opposed to saying, hey, I want you to feel what your hands are feeling like. What are your shoulders feeling like? And to go through this. So I think that it helps the behavior analyst to be able to better integrate into the team. Most of these teams, 9 times out of 10, they're going to have a psychologist, and they're going to be familiar with relaxation or some version of that. So I think then if we have this particular procedure that we're looking at, and I think one of the things that, as we're looking at this particular type of behavior, I think, Watson would disagree with some of the stuff that we're doing. He's like, covert behavior, whereas Skinner looked at private events. But I think as we're looking at these types of things, it does need to be in the tool bag, so to speak, so that individuals can practice this, because I've just seen so much of it that if individuals start to do on their own.
Have you seen this implemented in school settings?
I
know that's not your normal workplace, but have you heard of? Are you aware of this? I mean, because one of the things that I see a lot is that we have limited tools, or I think our ability to help children in schools with emotional and behavioral challenges. Sometimes our toolkit for kids with intellectual and developmental disabilities is awesome, and I think I think we have less well-developed tools for those individuals that with ADHD, ODD, the so-called angry kids, if you will. I work a lot with individuals with those types of issues, and so I'm always thinking, okay, what's the application to that population, which is massive, by the way, in comparison to the world of ASD and DD writ large.
I don't know if you ever seen the movie Paper Tiger.
No.
It's a fantastic. I would suggest you just take a look at it. Talks about trauma in kids. You mentioned angry kids, and it's just kind of popped on me. I've got a gentleman that actually works in University City, he works in a pretty rough area with kids that come in, and this ACE scores, high trauma ratings, and a lot of the kids that come in, he wants his teachers to have this, but it just talks about how a lot of these kids, due to their trauma histories, they have these anger issues and these other things that pop up, and it's not utilized. And oddly enough, Roger's initial applications with this were done with hyperactive kids. Actually, it was used with kids in the dental chair to overcome dental phobia. So as kids were in the dentist chair, or if they were having a lot of extreme behavior related to, I don't want to go, I don't even, desensitization, I don't want to have my teeth cleaned, that they would practice BRT. And that what they did is they actually utilized and practiced it for the dentist chair so they could engage in these things. And I've done it myself a couple of times, and I've had some dental procedure. I'm not a big fan of that either. But I think that hyperactive kids, there are a number of, we've got 2 chapters. One that actually looks at applications with individuals that are neurodiverse, and other applications with psychiatric disorders, and just across the board. But yet the initial applications were with kids. So there definitely is a precedent there in terms of its efficacy with that population.
Okay. So I want to talk about safety. So one of the things I do kind of worry about sometimes is that, we talk about really cool, novel interventions or things that people have just never heard about on this podcast, and people are going to just rush out and do it. So let's say someone, gets your book, they go through it and stuff like that. They're, pretty jazzed about incorporating this into their practice. They buy the argument. What other steps do they need to do to safeguard the welfare of clients? In other words, what are some common mistakes? What are some things that can go wrong that people should be aware of? And other sorts of ideas you might have about, like, if you think this is cool and you want to do it, just be aware of X, Y, and Z. Do A, B, and C to protect clients, etc. What are some additional thoughts you have on that? Because I would imagine that a lot of clinicians are listening to this right now saying, wow, this is really powerful stuff, and I'd like to look into incorporating this into my day-to-day activities and expand my toolkit. So what would you say to that with that BCBA or that clinician or whatever?
I would say definitely read and highlight the chapter on implementation. It is a step-by-step, even down to how many seconds. You need to do 15 seconds is observation. Then 15 seconds is scoring. And to make sure, and I would go with a fellow clinician or an RBT, and I would actually take turns practicing on the RBT and then the RBT on the BCBA. And then, because this is something that once the client's proficient, that the RBT can start to do as well. And so I would make sure that the individual is proficient. So you do fidelity checks on implementation of the procedure. The other one would be, I would say to always have an observer in there with you. Never be in the room alone with the individual as you're going through this. Now, there are some folks that I've had request of me saying, I'm more comfortable with you. Can they leave? And that's fine. But to protect yourself, especially like you mentioned, if you have an individual with trauma, or especially if you have somebody that has a history of sexual abuse allegations or sexual abuse in their past, that these particular things that you would have somebody in there, a witness of sorts, to be able to go through and do this. So first off, make sure you're proficient in the chapters and you're able to kind of walk through that. The second one would be to make sure that you practice the criterion so that the fidelity of the implementation of the procedure is there for both the RBT and the BCBA. as they're practicing this, and then to go through and make sure that, as you're going through with the application, that you keep your initial sessions pretty brief. Some individuals, as they go through, they're with eyes closed, they tell you they're comfortable with it. Having a person sit there for long periods of time is very, it can be aversive. And it's, I don't know if you've ever read, or any of our listeners are familiar with Eckhart Tolle. Eckhart Tolle is an individual that he's probably one of the first mindfulness guys, and he talks about mindfulness and essentially says that the initial path to freedom is a person being able to be calm and feel comfortable with their own thoughts. So if somebody is able to sit and relax, and I keep one by he's got a real cool book called Stillness Speaks. And it's about mindfulness and about observations. And I think that some people are not comfortable at all with their covert verbals. And as a result of that, whether it's reliving past trauma or other things, we are, from a verbal behavior type description, we are bidirectional creatures. We have that bidirectionality, which is what Hayes and Horn and Lowe call, that's our ability that's how we develop equivalence relations and different things, is that we have an anxious event, and before you know it, that is conditioned to whatever that restaurant you just went to or whatever person you're interacting with. And so you've got conditioning going on to where the individual in a bidirectional nature can say, oh, when I'm with Joe, I kind of freak out and I don't want to be around Joe anymore. And so as a result, they develop avoidance behavior related to Joe. So I think those are things we want to avoid with, you don't want the client avoiding the therapist. So I think those are important things to look at. Got it.
Okay. So another kind of, I guess, scope question. So what would you say to someone, if someone said to you, John, this sounds great and everything like that, but is this in the realm of therapy, and am I qualified to do that as a BCBA? Or psychotherapy, more specifically, not behavior therapy,
Right. And it's totally within the realm of behavior therapy, similar to systematic desensitization with Joseph Volpe and others. So what I would say is to seek out individuals that are proficient in this before jumping in the deep end on your own. Luckily, I had Roger as my advisor. And I also had Dr. Duane Lundervold, who's at Central Missouri. He's a co-author with us on the book. And he's actually the main author on this book. So I think that seeking out somebody like that, because I had all those mentors, and everybody that I work with, we go through, and then I'm teaching all of our staff, okay, here's what we need to do. Here's what BRT looks like. Here's what you need to do. And I'll have our therapists observe me running the groups first before they do it. And then I observe them doing it to give feedback based on that. And that would be my suggestion. Now, if you have somebody in northern New Hampshire and you don't have a Roger Poppin that's able to do those things. And
you don't have John Guercio on speed dial, like someone.
Right.
I know.
Right. Then, I would go through and, I think there's a lot of opportunities. I'm doing workshops at ABBA that are going to be related to this. Also doing a lot of webinar-based trainings based on that. So I would say that information is out there, that if individuals kind of seek that out and see. And I've also, as a result of just doing my webinars on it, I've done some long-range consultation oversight with individuals that have wanted to integrate this into their practice. And when we do our Zooms, they're shooting the same questions that you are right now.
Yeah.
What about this? What about that? And so I will walk them through it and then have them go through and then present questions to me based on, doing this stuff where maybe they're doing it with role play with their RBT or another BCBA. So that's what I would suggest if you're able to kind of do those things, and just like in other areas, it's not as dangerous, obviously, as having somebody that doesn't have, practice putting an extinction procedure in place and what that would look like, but I think also there are all these other things with relaxation-induced anxiety and other things that would prohibit an individual's ability to be able to do that. And then I think those are key areas. And so those folks, if they're not in close proximity, that can be reached through the internet, that would be willing to provide some oversight. And I'll be glad if folks have questions about that, to answer any that they might have, and even point you in the right direction to folks that would be more than willing to assist with folks that are looking to add this to their repertoire.
What do you suppose about? You mentioned the challenges and the obvious problems with self-report. When I had Jonathan Tarbox on the show a few years ago, we were talking about ACT and scope of practice and things like that. And he said, look, if your dependent variable is self-report measures of internal states, run away. I don't want to put words in Jonathan's mouth, but I'm paraphrasing, of course. But so would you advise people to pretty much stick to the dependent measures as it relates to the fidelity with which they implement the postures? Is that one way to kind of conceptualize what a successful outcome might be for this type of intervention?
Absolutely. I think as you're going through, as we utilize these, this is just something to be able to kind of get a marker, so to speak, for an individual as they're trying to kind of report out to. Really, it's working on their verbal behavior. Hey, I'm feeling better. I'm feeling relaxed, and to kind of then generalize this. But the BRS is your true dependent measure. And as you're looking at that, that's relaxed behavior as a dependent variable in the 10 postures, because if the individual is engaged in those postures, they're going to be engaging in relaxed behavior. Now, covertly, whatever is going on, whatever trauma states. And so I think that's where the window that we get into the organism comes in the way of a biofeedback machine and being able to kind of look at that. There are, and again, if individuals are interested, they can contact me. As part of our work here, we have done work with NAD, the National Association for Dual Diagnosis. And as part of that, we went through a training, and I became a clinical examiner through NAD. So what we do is, if individuals are willing to be a certified clinical examiner, certified through NAD, certified dual diagnosis specialist at the clinical level, you go through these trainings. There's a long interview. There's a written product that has to be graded. So I'm now an examiner, and I go through and examine and give out questions for folks that are interested in doing these types of things. But at one of our conferences for NAD, we had individual husband and wife team that did neurofeedback, and they helped me tremendously, walking me through. Here's what you need to do, and if you want to get certified, the certification is called BCIA. It's through the Biofeedback Certification Institute of America, and that's one of the things that Roger and I had looked at early on. It's a very extensive test, very AP, anatomy and physiology based in terms of placement of the electrodes, but anybody that's interested, I can point them in that direction, because that's the type of training, criterion based and evidence based, that one would need to go through if they're doing some of these things in practice. And I've had to go through, like I said, with Roger and with others, and I think the certification or working with folks that are certified would really strengthen skills in that area.
Got it. I appreciate you sharing those resources. So I think we're coming up on time here. I want to give you an opportunity to share any final thoughts, any final words of advice for people who are interested in this stuff. And then maybe we can, if I can hold you over for a few more minutes, we can have some story time for the Patreon subscribers.
Right.
So will you any final thoughts on BRT for those who are getting jazzed about it and want to get into it? And I'll be sure to make sure people know how to contact you and vis-a-vis the show notes. So I'll have links and all that stuff to the references and resources you mentioned.
Well, I think a main one is, Charlie Catania always says the names for behavioral effects don't explain them. So essentially, the behavioral effects, the butterflies in the stomach, the heart rate, and all that, that's anxiety. Well, that doesn't explain it. A lot of people just say anxiety doesn't explain it. Pat Fryman, Steve Hayes, and Kelly Wilson did a fantastic paper on anxiety in JABA in 1998. I've suggested it's a fantastic read. Majority of the paper actually goes into derived relational responding, which is kind of that area, but it also talks about why behavior analysts stray away from this stuff. Is because it's scary. It covers different response classes, and most folks look at it and say, oh, it's not behavioral. It absolutely is behavioral. And it's a setting event for most of the stuff that we observe and that we're intervening with. So I would say, my parting thoughts would be that to get into situations where we increase our comfort level, I think with things that aren't direct stimulus response observable right there in the moment, that there are these other things that we look at and kind of what is anxiety. And I think, in that paper, I think at one point Fryman gives the example of somebody that is anxious about crossing a street. And they cross the street and they have all the physiological correlates of panic, whereas a second person crosses the street, a car almost hits them, and they have the same exact physiological response. So how do we parse that out? One is fear, one's anxiety. What does that mean? And Pat points us back to, let's look at the context and a behavioral analysis of what are those situations? What's the context of the person crossing the street? There is no car, but they're freaking out and they're having these physiological responses, heart rate, their breathing. For a lot of people that have panic attacks, when I do my trainings with staff, a lot of folks, nod their head. Panic attacks can be immobilizing for folks that experience them. And so I think that if we get more practiced in working with things like anxiety, but looking at, like Catania says, that it's behavioral effect, but it's not the cause of behavior. Anxiety is not causing behavior. Anxiety is not a construct that initiates this. This is what's the learning history. So how do we look at different things like in bringing things like experiential avoidance into it? In most individuals, they're having anxious behavior. It's because they're avoiding all the situations that are getting in the way of their having a fuller life and being more autonomous. Okay, values in ACT parlance. So I think that's the biggest thing. Be more comfortable with addressing this. Seek out alternate ways. Go to different workshops that maybe are out of your comfort zone if you're doing these types of things. Because this is if you really get into it and you have somebody, let's say a kid. I've had numerous young adults and adults that are on the spectrum that you can kind of tweak their special interest, in this area. That, as you're going through, you can blend that in an ability to say, hey, this is something that, we're going to practice. And, let's say had one young man whose interest was space flight. And so, okay, you're in a space capsule and you're doing these things, but you can't move. Okay, you have to be calm and your breathing has to be, really at the level that we're talking about, slow breathing, so they can then integrate it that way. But I think that the more we become comfortable with these things, then we can get away from things like count to 10 and leave the area. We have to equip folks with those certain things. And I think that being able to say, okay, well, here's what you do once you get to that other area. And maybe next time you can do this before you get to the area and you're not as likely to do that. So I look at it as a setting event as well, being able to be fully relaxed and then going into a situation, you're going to handle it better than if you weren't.
Cool. Thank you very much, John. Always fun chatting about this stuff. And one of my favorite things to do on this show is to share interesting and I suppose relatively novel things like this with the audience who may not get exposure to it in their coursework and supervision. So thanks for helping serve the mission of the podcast, broadly speaking. So let's all right, so let's turn the page here and engage in some chat for the Patreon subscribers. So I want to talk about and apologies to subscribers who may not necessarily be football fans here, but you had the most amazing story, and I don't think I've actually talked to you about it. I've seen you kind of document this on Facebook, but you met one of your heroes essentially. From the Vikings, right? And the most amazing thing happened from this. So I'm going to maybe just shut up and let you tell the story. I want to hear all about it.
All right, this is relaxing to me in and of itself, just telling this story.
All right, folks, that's going to wrap it up for the public feed of the Behavioral Observations podcast. So if you'd like to listen to the remaining bit of the story that John's going to tell, you can just sign up for the Patreon I would try the early adopter tier. That's what I would recommend. And you can find that at patreon.com/behavioral observations. And you know what? The reverse works too. behavioralobservations.com/Patreon. So I hope you enjoyed the show, and I will see you in session 180.
Thank you for listening to the Behavioral Observations Podcast with Matt Sikoria. You can find Matt's notes on this episode at www.behavioralobservations.com. We also invite you to stay connected with us on Facebook at facebook.com/behavioral observations and on Twitter at Behavior Podcast.